Before 1880, only 10% of Africa was controlled by European powers. Colonies and settlements, mainly left over from the defunct slave trade, dotted the coast, but otherwise Europe held very little influence over Africa. This didn't bother old imperialist Europe too much, as Africa was viewed as the white man's grave. Europeans who dared venture into the African interior faced new diseases like malaria and the severe African environment. Technological progress and human exploration soon changed this, though. Missionaries and adventurers like Dr. David Livingstone and Henry Stanley provided early information about the continent, and Mungo Park's ventures up the Niger River showed Africa to be a viable trading partner. The Second Industrial Revolution further provided the tools for new European empires, as inventions like steamboats, railways, machine guns, and quinine, the cure for malaria, increased European colonial capacity. The scramble for Africa provides an example of new imperialism. The growth of capitalist economies lent Africa appeal as both a new marketplace and a source for raw materials like palm oil. European powers rushed to gain influence. Much of this was settled in 1884, when Otto von Bismarck presided over the Berlin Conference. Here, countries attempted to settle their spheres of influence and established mechanisms for making new territorial claims. The conference created rules about things like occupation and regional free trade in Africa.
Great Britain. Great Britain established a form of indirect rule over much of Africa, employing existing tribal structures to establish rules, while English officials exercised a behind-the-scenes veto power. Spreading south from Egypt and north from the Cape Colony, the English Empire swept through much of eastern Africa. Prime Minister Cecil Rhodes attempted to connect both halves of the African empire with new technology like railroads. Though England profited greatly from the diamonds in the region, they struggled to put down many violent insurrections. During the 1878 Anglo-Zulu War, Shaka Zulu led his tribe against the British settlers. The resulting Battle of Isandlwana marked the first defeat of a European force by African natives, though the Zulu were eventually put down. From 1899 to 1902, the British fought the Boer War, caused by the British decision to annex the Boer republics for their diamonds. The Boer were Dutch descendants that had settled in Africa, and were also called Afrikaners. They fought fiercely with guerrilla tactics, but the British soon were victorious. In an attempt to please the white Boers, though, the British soon instituted apartheid, the legal separation of blacks and whites in the South African region.
France. Unlike the British, the French employed direct rule, in which European officials administered regulations for their colonial subjects. Often referred to as the Sandbox, French imperial holdings included much of the Sahara Desert, Northwest Africa, and Madagascar. During the 1840s and 50s, the French focused on consolidating their Algerian holdings as Algerian guerrillas fought back under the leadership of Abd Kader. French colonial drive eastward was eventually halted by the British during the Fashoda Incident, the biggest African territorial dispute between two imperial powers. After a tense meeting between the two armies, France, coping with domestic problems like the Dreyfus Affair, was forced to retreat and recognize British control of Egypt, a humiliating result.
Germany. The dismissal of Bismarck ushered in a new era of imperial German foreign policy. While the French and British held relatively large connected land areas, German colonies were spread out across the lower half of the continent. German and French conflicts over the region of Morocco increased the tensions between the two nations as both tried to intimidate the other during the Moroccan crisis of 1905 and the Agadir incident of 1911. During both events, Germany challenged the growing French influence in Morocco, hoping to humiliate France and weaken its ties with Britain. This backfired, leaving Germany more isolated than ever and increasing the tensions that would lead to the First World War. Germany's violent treatment of its colonial subjects also caused tension, though with Africans instead of imperial powers. A prime example is the East African Mahi Mahi Rebellion, in which Germany's particularly violent regime motivated a 2-year uprising and an interethnic cooperation of the colonized. Though ultimately costful and unsuccessful, the rebellion forced Kaiser Wilhelm to institute colonial reforms.
Belgium. Under Leopold II, Belgium controlled the Congo Free State, an area 76 times larger than Belgium itself, that took 10 years to subjugate. The Congo was granted to Leopold by the Berlin Conference against the protest of many other nations. The stipulations that came with this territory included free trading and shipping in the Congo for all European countries.
Spain. Spain held a small portion of northern Africa, including a protectorate in Morocco shared with France.
Portugal. Portugal held territory on southern African coasts, constituting present-day Angola on the west and Mozambique on the east. This territory was meant to serve as a buffer from Belgian and German conflict, but it spurred extended wars of resistance by natives instead.
Italy. Arriving late to the colonization game, Italy struggled to gain a foothold in North Africa between the British Sudan and the French Somaliland. It gained Tripoli but suffered a humiliating defeat in what is now Ethiopia in 1896. It was not until the World Wars that Italy was finally able to take control of the area.
Other African regions. While a majority of the continent was colonized by European powers, small parts of Africa maintained relative independence. One such region was Liberia, settled by repatriated African and African American slaves from the Americas and virtually a dependency of the United States. Another was Abyssinia, or Ethiopia. Under King Menelik II, the Ethiopians repelled Italian colonization attempts at battles like Adowa. It wasn't until 1936 that the Italians finally occupied the nation. Ultimately, colonization had significant social and economic impacts on the African continent. The use of the term tribe by the Berlin Conference and the division of Africa along colonial lines homogenized previously ethnically separate groups. Colonization also made the African economy one dominated by European interests. Western-based capitalism reduced the opportunities of African economic participants, while imperial control of African markets and resources propped up unprofitable European industries. African resistance, though inspiring some reform, did little to change the unequal relationship between colonizers and the colonized, and its effects can still be seen in the underdevelopment of the continent to this day.